that are here in the present. I thank you very much. So today's topic is on the civil rights period, and it's titled Equality or Fallacy. There will be some things that I will be addressing that might be difficult for some because they have never heard of these things before. We will also be delving into the assassination of both Brother Malcolm and Dr. King. And because as a historian, we have to follow what's called the chronological order, which simply means everything stays in order. We don't take anything out of the context. This is why this is going to take a while. So let's get started with this presentation. The Civil Rights Period, Equality or Fallacy. Introduction. The Civil Rights Period of the 60s is one of the most turbulent times in Black folks' lives within America. As men and women, the mistreatment was blatant and unchecked. Every president was in agreement with each state's addition to their laws that disregarded and perpetually prevented Blacks of escaping the systematic poverty. The Big Six would lead the people down a path which continues today to keep the masses impoverished. The Great Society of Lyndon Baines Johnson, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, was yet another illusion of inclusion that was revealed to be another nightmare. We will address some of the ills of this volatile period. In 1866, and of course this is following the Civil War, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, as you can see, enacted on April the 9th, 1866, was instituted to define citizenship, in particular to the freedmen. It stated that all were equally protected by law. Of course, this is not fact, and this did not occur. What they were doing throughout the legacy of and the history of America is they were enacting laws and passing laws, but these laws were frivolous. They had no meaning and no real substance for the collective people that they later would call freedmen. Now, freedmen, the reason why they were called freedmen, this is following the Civil War when the ancestors were freed supposedly from slavery, and that enslavement was 246 years. In 1875, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 is also known as the Enforcement Act or Force Act. This was passed during the Reconstruction era, and the Reconstruction era is following the Civil War. And this was approximately 10 years, some say 11 years, to grant Blacks equal treatment in public accommodations, public transportation, and to prohibit exclusion from jury service. Plessy versus Ferguson is one of those acts that came about because of this act here. So then we have this particular moment, which we have to address. And there has to be a little time spent on this. This is called the Compromise of 1876. We actually had this occur twice, but most of us that are not studying history are not aware of this. But the second episode of this was George W. Bush and Al Gore. And it was a compromise. And what I mean by a compromise, they agreed to inflict harm upon us and by any means necessary. So these three particular states, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, following this compromise, they moved the federal troops. Now, let me explain what this means. What many of us are not aware of, following the Civil War, Blacks or African people had a difficult time with dealing with all the many issues that we were dealing with. Lynching would take place, and I'm going to definitely get into the subject of lynching because it was a very tumultuous situation that our people had to deal with. But Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida in particular, they removed the federal troops. Now, most people say, well, what exactly does that mean? And why would that be mentioned for a presidential election? Because with the removal of those federal troops, lynching occurred. And so the breakdown for the so-called 400 years, it's not 400, it's 396. It was 246 years of enslavement. It was 100 years of lynching and 50 years of segregation, totaling 396. Some people say it was 400 years. But in actuality, our emancipation has not occurred, not as of yet, and it would not be under the United States. So this particular person right here, he was a Democrat. His name was Hayes. Hayes was the one who would become very influential in some of the things that would take place with us. So David M. Key, he was a Democrat. What we don't seem to quite understand is whether Democrat or Republican, it has never been a good thing for us as a people. Both of them have been playing or using us um, as a kicking ball on a field. So David Key would become the Postmaster General under Hayes. Hayes became the President of the United States. So we're going to get into how he became the President of the United States and why this is called the Compromise of 1876 in just a moment. So under Hayes, this was one of the major issues that took place. It was the Transcontinental Railroad, which was from Texas to the Pacific into the South. Now, one of the things they speak about when they talk about this building of this railroad and these railroads across the West, it was the Chinese and white American men that were influential in building these railroads. Nothing can be further from the truth. There is absolutely nowhere you're going to find in American history where African men and women were not involved in building whatever they were building. And we were there on the railroads. As a matter of fact, we were the very first to build the railroads. All throughout Virginia, those railroads were built by slaves. All throughout Virginia, the South, it were built by slaves. So this was something that continued under President Hayes. So restore the South to pre-Civil War status. What exactly does that mean? Well, slavery has never truly ceased. What exactly am I speaking about? How come slavery has not truly stopped? It hasn't ceased. There are actually three 13th Amendments. I've spoken about these in length before, and I just have to touch on them. I'm not going to stay on them long, but there are actually three 13th Amendments. The first one is called the Title of Nobility, and that was in 1811. You can look this up. And what was taking place, white men were going back to Europe. Now, first of all, understand something. The Europe that we know of today is not the original Europe. The original Europe had an African people there, and most notably, the Grimaldi people. And the Grimaldi bones are in every museum in Europe. But that being said, the European white male were returning back to their Europe. And when they were returning there, some of them were being knighted. And there have been some blacks that have been knighted as well. As a matter of fact, Colin Powell was knighted. Many people are not aware of that. The problem that America was having is where if you are knighted and we will have a war with England or France or Spain, who would you show allegiance to? So they enacted the first 13th Amendment, and this amendment stated that if any male white was to be knighted, they lost their citizenship. The second 13th Amendment, that would come under the only president of the United States, and that was James Buchanan. And James Buchanan was a man that was in the homosexual lifestyle. As a matter of fact, his niece was the acting first lady of the United States, and his lover was the vice president of Franklin Pierce. You can look this up. This is nothing that is hidden. Really, it is not. But he had a disdain for African people, as did all the presidents of America, each and every one of them. And eventually I will get to the presentation on Obama, and that's going to be a very difficult ride, but I will address that soon. But that being the case, what James Buchanan did is he signed the second 13th Amendment, and this second 13th Amendment I call the Perpetual Amendment because it was intended to keep us enslaved forever. We were never supposed to receive our emancipation. President Abraham Lincoln, who came after him in the next administration, verbally agreed with this act. The last 13th Amendment is the one that we all know, which is the one that supposedly freed us. But we have not in totality read the 13th Amendment that we know or think we know. It actually says that those that were enslaved would be free, but except for a crime or punishment. So the 13th Amendment, the third one, is still being used today to place our people in those conditions that we call prisons. And this is Rutherford B. Hayes. He was a Republican, and he would agree along with this next man right here, which is Samuel Tilden, on a compromise. Now, here's what a compromise is. No one has really won, or someone really has won an election or whatever, and there's controversy behind it. George W. Bush again, and of course, that will be Al Gore. And then, of course, we had Donald Trump and we had Biden. There was controversy with that. And Tilden and Hayes, yet more controversy. Neither one of these men really had any great love for African people. And the Democratic Party was notorious for enacting all kind of crimes upon Black people. As a matter of fact, African people. As a matter of fact, the KKK, which was devised by Albert Pike and Nathan Bedford Forrest and others, they ran free because they knew that there were no laws in place that were going to stop them from what they were doing. So Samuel Tilden won the popular vote by over 250,000 votes, but it was close in the electoral college. So what they did is, metaphorically speaking, they had a compromise. They agreed that Rutherford B. Hayes would become president of the United States, Samuel Tilden would remain in the Congress, and they would remove the soldiers from the South. Well, what does this have to do with African people? This is where the lynching started. So according to history, they estimate 5,000. Some say it could be way higher than that in lynchings. But this is where the lynching began with these two men. The rise of the rope. Again, it was estimated between 1880 and 1968, 5,000 blacks were lynched. Again, this is just an estimation because it could be higher than this. This right here is Laura Nelson, as you can see, and this right here is her son. So let me tell you about the story of these two ancestors. So Laura Nelson is the mother of Lawrence Nelson. So her husband had a dispute with a white male, and so law enforcement got involved, and this occurred on May the 26th, 1911. So this is when this occurred, and this event took place on May the 1st. So what had happened is, in this act, law enforcement went to the Nelson household and they asked for a shotgun. They refused to give him the shotgun, and in the melee, this officer was killed. So on May the 1st, and May the 1st is very significant. And let me explain to you why May the 1st is very significant. Don't believe anything I say. I always say this, never believe anything I say. But look into it. May the 1st, 1776 is the birthday of the Illuminati. This is when the Illuminati was created. So all the events that you find in American history on May the 1st in world history and American history, none of them are good. And what I did is I actually just put a few out. I wrote down a few to remind myself to tell you, because I wanted y'all to hear of some of these events that took place on May the 1st, to include the Nelson lynching, and you'll see the connection in a minute. Decoration Day, which is known as Memorial Day, which was created by 13 Black women down in South Carolina. That was actually supposed to be observed in the month of April. But those white abolitionists came down to the South, and of course, they got involved with these 13 Black women, and they changed that date to May the 1st. The Lusitania left New York Harbor in 1915 on May the 1st. Several days later, it was sunk. After J.P. Morgan made the announcement that if the Lusitania was sunk, it would give America an excuse to go into the war, and eventually it was sunk. Thomas Blayton, many people are not aware of him. He was found guilty of that Birmingham bombing in 2001, and this took place on May the 1st. And lastly, President Obama on May the 1st, 2011, and I have the video, which will be seen when I present this presentation, where Obama on May the 1st, 2011, walked down the red carpet in the White House and told one of the worst lies he could have ever told, which was Osama bin Laden was assassinated. That's impossible. Osama bin Laden was killed in 2007, and I definitely have the proof for that. So on May the 1st of 1911, Lord Nelson and Lawrence Nelson, they were arrested, and while they were arrested, a mob gathered. Now, this is something I tell our people quite a bit. Let's get something straight. I know many people don't want to hear what I'm about to say, but don't believe me, look it up. Law enforcement, the police, was not created to protect no one but white males. Let me say this again. Law enforcement, the police, was only created to protect white males. The early form of the police, they were called patrollers. Most of them were illiterate white males who patrolled the roads, the dirt roads, looking for any of our ancestors that didn't have proper papers. And if you remember Kunta Kinte's foot getting cut off, that was by the patrollers. So in this particular incident, the Nelsons, this is law enforcement. They arrested these two, mother and son. They raped Lord Nelson. They raped her and then they killed her. And then they found her son, Lawrence. And as you can see, his pants are at his ankle. Now, what is this about? It's called castration. What they would do, especially with a black male, they had this thing they called buck breaking. And they would strip them of all their clothes, lay them down face to the dirt, spread eagle, tied both of their hands and their ankles. And it was sodomize them. Why would they do such a cruel act? Because they wanted to put fear into our people. And they succeeded. So in this particular instance, they castrated them. Now, when they did castrations, usually it was for one of two reasons. They would keep the phallus, and they would keep this phallus as a souvenir, and sometimes they would actually consume it. I know it sounds graphic, but I have to keep it real, and real will keep it. This is the father of Pan-Africanism, Edward Bladden. And Edward Bladden is the one who would eventually start, you might say, the civil rights period. Of course, with Marcus Garvey being the first one. And Marcus Garvey is not in this presentation because I have a presentation specifically for Marcus Garvey. He was without question the greatest leader we've ever had, ever, as far as this hemisphere is concerned. But this particular person is Edward Bladden, who is the father of Pan-Africanism. So the founders of the NAACP, this is very important. And the two most influential people of these founders of the NAACP is Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois. But I have to get into them as well as some of the whites that were involved as well. Moorefield Story we'll get to in a moment. Mary Overton we'll speak about briefly, and Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois I'll put a little bit more attention to. This is Moorefield's story. He was the first leader of the NAACP, even though it said it was for colored people. If you pay attention to our history, the majority of the time, either they're in the front of the leadership or they're in the shadows pulling the strings like a puppeteer. This is Mary Overton right here. There's Ida B. Wells. And Ida B. Wells got involved in this movement because two of her friends actually owned businesses and they were lynched. They were lynched. And so she started writing about this, and her life was threatened, and she would move. And she would continue her work all the way up until her death. W.B. Du Bois was one of the most influential and most talented and the most educated men we have ever had. But he was part of the 10%. And he said there was the talented tenth of our people that would lead us. And of course, that would become the Divine Nine, as they would call themselves. So this is W.B. Du Bois, who actually went to Africa and got trapped there, but that's another story. But we have to continue on with this story about the NAACP and see how it connects with the civil rights movement. So the first president of the NAACP, again, Moorfield Story, and he was a Jew. Now, let's get something straight about the Jews. And I would say this. One of the ancestors, Dr. John Henry Clark, said this: "We have no friends." When he first stated that, and I heard it, I didn't understand what he meant by that. And as time went on, I did figure out what he was talking about. We have no friends that truly want to see us free and really are concerned about what is taking place with us. That's what Dr. Clark meant by that. So the Jews have never cared about us at all. As a matter of fact, the Jews have been perpetuating one of the greatest lies ever in the annals of history, which is they are the original people of the Bible. Well, that's impossible because the story of the Bible all transpired where? In Africa, El Kibalon. So I don't know how in the world Europeans got over there whatsoever into that story, into that narrative. It's impossible. That couldn't have happened. So Moorefield's story and Spingarn, who we'll get to in a moment, they were instrumental in keeping us down by being a part of this movement. And there he is, right there. Spingarn. Now, Spingarn, I have to spend just a little bit more time on. He had a brother, and they were both Jews, and they were in the military, and they were also agents of the American government. And as there's an award, they still have to this day called the Spingarn Award, Spingarn Medal, and it's given to who they deem is the best of the best for what they perceive. These are the people that are a part of the NAACP, and they are part of the ones who walk on the red carpet. So Spingarn, as you can see, actually was the chairman of the board twice. And under his rulership, he continued to do as much as he could to keep us as a people from ever escaping our ills. So here's the cabinet of the NAACP. And I only posted this because I wanted you to see the name at the very bottom. So this was as of May the 30th, 1910. And at the very bottom, you see the Director of Publicity and Research, Dr. William Edward Burghardt, the boy. And now, why is that important? Because W.E.B. Du Bois had more education and knowledge and understanding of what was taking place in America than anyone that you see on this board. But this shows you the disrespect of even of the well-noted of us as a people. Queen Mother Moore. Now, Queen Mother Moore is not a name many people today even recognize. As a child, I remember hearing about Queen Mother Moore. She got her start in the movement under Marcus Garvey. As a matter of fact, I heard Dr. Khalid Muhammad say that she used to pack a weapon. And I actually looked into that, and I found the story that he was talking about. It took place in Louisiana. So it would be Marcus Garvey who went to Louisiana to give a speech, but law enforcement tried to prevent him from speaking. So Queen Mother Moore was in attendance with hundreds of our people. And so law enforcement came in with the idea that they were going to stop Garvey from speaking. So Queen Mother Moore said that they all stood up and got up on the bleachers. And everybody pulled out a handgun from Smith & Wesson's 44s, 45s, 38s, 22s, and said law enforcement left. So she was very instrumental in the movement called civil rights, and all the way up until her death. And as you can see, she was born in 1898, which was the beginning of the Spanish-American War. She was pushing for reparations. Reparations is nothing more than compensation for a wrongdoing. But it is impossible for America and the European nations to do right, because in order to do right, you first have to have morality. And none of the European leaders have ever had such trait. So there's no way the reparations will ever be awarded to us as a people. Malcolm X. Malcolm X, Detroit Red, Malik El-Hajj Shabazz. Without question, this is the second most important figure ever in this hemisphere for this people that has been going through hell. And the only one above him, period, is Marcus Mosiah Garvey. That is it. Why am I saying that? Well, we're going to see why in a moment. Now, with Brother Malcolm X, there has to be a lot of time put into him. I'm not going to rush. And the reason why I don't want to rush is because, as Jeff knows, very well. We are taught as historians, we have to follow the chronological order, but we're also taught that we have to research everything we find, and there's nothing we're supposed to run from regarding history. So as historians, this is what we're supposed to go by, and this is what I do go by. So we're going to have to really get into Brother Malcolm, because one of the things they did with Brother Malcolm is following his death and then Dr. King's death in 1968, they started to revise. And we have a word as historians, it's a revisionist. And a revisionist is nothing more than a person who rewrites an accurate narrative and make it into a falsehood. And that's what they have done with Brother Malcolm. And Dr. King, for all that he did, his name should not be mentioned with Malcolm at all, in no regard. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you a little story. There's a TV show called The Godfather of Harlem. I've been watching it. It's supposed to return sometime soon. It's about Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson met Brother Malcolm in his early infancy being in the Nation of Islam. And Bumpy loved Brother Malcolm to the point where he actually wanted to go out and do harm to some in the Nation of Islam. That's how serious he was about that. And when Malcolm died, he was devastated, according to his wife in her autobiography, where she talked about Brother Malcolm, to the point where he said this to his wife, Mamie, said, "I wish he had listened to me." So he knew, this is Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, how valuable Malcolm was to us as a people. And we're going to go deep into Brother Malcolm. As you can see, this is when he was born and his murder. So he didn't die of natural causes. He was murdered. And we're going to definitely get into those that was involved by name. We're not going to be just delving into this lightly. No, we're going to stomp into this. So he enters prison in 1946. And why did he enter prison? Well, they said because he was out there committing larceny, stealing, and things like that. But let's keep it real. Brother Malcolm was incarcerated for having that affair with that white woman. And they didn't like that. So it was in prison that he would turn his life around. And it is true that he did study the entire the entire dictionary, to the point where he knew that dictionary like the back of his hand. 1952, he was released from prison. He joins the Nation of Islam. Now, there are many things that Brother Malcolm has done that they're trying today to associate with Elijah Muhammad and Louis Farrakhan. So let's go into some of those things that Brother Malcolm did that Elijah Muhammad or Elijah Poole and Louis Farrakhan did not do. It was Brother Malcolm that built up all these temples across this country. It was Brother Malcolm that started the FOI. It was Brother Malcolm that started Muhammad Speaks, which was changed to now the Final Call. It was Brother Malcolm who went over to Africa, and John Lewis said this. Dr. King sent a delegation, with him included, to Africa. They were trying to get African leaders to get on board with what they were doing in the Dr. King's movement. And John Lewis said everywhere we went, Malcolm was ahead of us. And this is what John Lewis said. The Africans were asking him, do you know Malcolm? Do you know Malcolm X? See, yeah, we know Brother Malcolm. How does he feel about you being here? 33 leaders, 33 African leaders joined forces with Brother Malcolm. No one was listening to Dr. King but white folk in America and white folk outside of America, and those of us that were in the South. There was a saying in the 60s and 70s. In the 60s and 70s, this was the saying: people in the South are slow. I'm from Virginia. I can attest to that because I was one of them. I woke up because I went in the military. And strangely, I started learning our history over those 45 years I've been out of high school. And that's why I'm not slow anymore. So for all of those that keep trying to dismiss Malcolm and rewrite the narrative, no, you're not going to rewrite the narrative. This is the actual narrative of Brother Malcolm. And we're not done. So 1964, following his being pushed out of the nation because they were so, what's the word I want to use for the leadership of the nation at that time? Immature definitely fits, and they did not quite comprehend that the American government was involved with this. So let me get into this now. According to The Judas Factor by Carl Evans, Carl Evans said there's the possibility that 4 entities were involved in Malcolm's death. Let's touch on them right now. The United States government, that does include the New York Police Department. That does include the FBI, because J. Edgar Hoover knew Malcolm was being targeted for death, and he did nothing about it. And let us not forget that Malcolm was not allowed to leave that plane in France. And Malcolm knew that was a government move. So also the mafia. Now, this is the one that really baffled me. I didn't grasp it. It took me a while to grasp what he was saying. But he said, think about what Malcolm did. He created this FOI. And what was the FOI doing? It was protecting the Black community. They were also going in there to make sure that alcohol and drugs was not going into the Black community. What does that have to do with the mafia? Everything. Who you think was pushing those drugs and prostitution into the Black community? The mafia. Makes sense. And lastly, the NOI, the Nation of Islam. Now, why is it that the historian have to talk about this? This is the only reason I am so animated with this topic on Brother Malcolm. The American government has never said we were involved or we weren't involved. The mafia has never said we weren't involved or we were involved. The FBI and no one else has ever said we were not involved. We didn't do it. It's only the nation. And if the nation had been quiet, no one would have ever said anything to him, but they have kept on saying, oh no, Malcolm did it to himself. And we had nobody in the nation that was involved. Really? We definitely gonna get into all the names that are well documented momentarily. 1965, murdered by ? Well, there's not going to be any question marks at the end of this part 1. So this right here is the incident that took place on April the 26th, 1957. This is what put Malcolm on the stage. Now, many people say it was the hate produced in 1959. No, in actuality, it's this event. Because before I show it to you, because we've all seen this is where Denzel is playing Malcolm. And there are many people say, well, the movie is not accurate. Let me explain something to you. Dr. Arthur Abraham, my mentor, and he also taught Brother Jeff, he taught us this. He said, when it comes to Hollywood does what most people do. They revise the story. So they sensationalize it. They add something to it to make it exciting, but it didn't happen. So that's all that was. So let's talk about this a little bit. When Malcolm surrounded that police station in 1957, there were 4,000 FOI and sisters in white. A man by the name of Reese Poe, P-O-E, was being assaulted by the police. And Johnson Hinton, who was in the Nation, spoke up, and he made the statement, you're not in Alabama, this is New York. And then they assaulted him. That's the beginning of the story. And then this is what transpired.
Brother Johnson was attacked by the police.
The brother was just watching, and the cop came on and said, move on. The brother didn't move quick enough for the old thing. I mean, crap, he was bleeding like a stuck hog. So what you gonna do? He'll rap a little. He's a Muslim. But you ain't gonna do nothing but make a speech.
Muslims talk a good game, but they never do nothing.
All right. We demand to see Brother Johnson.
Who the hell? A second. What is your name, fella?
Don't worry about what my name is. 2 witnesses saw Brother Johnson brought in here beat up. Nobody saw him brought out.
You didn't hear the sergeant? Outside.
I suggest you look outside that window.
Jimmy, come here a second.
Yes, we intend to see Brother Johnson.
Get an ambulance. Now!
Brett, break it up. You got what you wanted.
No, I'm not satisfied. To the hospital.
All right, that's enough. I want these people moved out of here.
Fruit of Islam are disciplined men. They haven't broken any laws. Yet.
What about them?
That's your headache, Captain. But if Brother Johnson dies, I pity you. Doctor.
He'll live.
Now I'm pausing right here, and the reason why I'm pausing right here, I want you to see this doctor that's to your left. This person, his name is Wyatt T. Walker. Wyatt T. Walker was the chief of staff for Dr. King in real life. So this is Wyatt T. Walker, and he came from out of Petersburg, Virginia, by way of New York. He was a preacher at Guilford Baptist Church. So he played this role of a doctor right here. This is Wyatt T. Walker. He actually debated Malcolm. It's a very famous video you can see of him where they're on television, and it's a smoke-filled studio, and they were debating Malcolm on his ideology.
Brother Johnson was attacked by the police.
So I'm going to pause right there.
Was just watching. And
All right, I'm moving forward. This is COINTELPRO. So we're going to have to get into COINTELPRO to understand why this was created, for what reason it was created, and why were so many people executed, murdered, however you want to use the terminology. These people were murdered for what reason? This is called the COINTEL Papers. So on March the 8th, 1971, several white people, and I can't think of two of them I know by name, because their identities were held secret because they knew they was going to probably be murdered. They broke into the FBI office, and strangely, the place in where the FBI office was media, M-E-D-I-A, media, like the news media, Pennsylvania. Media, Pennsylvania. So on March the 8th, 1971, they broke into this FBI building. And when they broke in there, they actually found boxes with papers, piles of papers. Later, they be called the COINTEL Papers, Counterintelligence Program Papers. And on NBC, on December the 6th, 1973, it was announced what those papers were about. And we're going to see that video in just a second. And that's Carl Stern. So let me back up. Hopefully I can back up. There we go. All right, so I'm going to have to stop right here on this paper because I don't need to read it. I've read it so many times, but this was found in these papers. Why is this paper so important? Why, of all the documents that they had in those boxes, what does this have to do with Malcolm? Why must this paper be spoken about? Because this is the one that lets you know once and for all who exactly was this government concerned about. They weren't concerned about Elijah Muhammad. They certainly wasn't concerned about Louis X because he was up and coming, and he really never been able to fulfill Malcolm's shoes, ever. So if you can see and read this, and you don't have to believe me, go look the paper up for yourself. You can easily find it. It's out there. So there were some names that were mentioned. This paper says we must prevent the rise of a black messiah, and Malcolm X is such a person. Dr. King, we're not concerned about Dr. King. He's passive, non-aggressive. Who's concerned about him? We're not concerned about Elijah Muhammad, Elijah Pooh. We're not concerned about him. He's old. Who's concerned about him? Stokely Carmichael is up and coming. He's charismatic. But Malcolm X is a threat. So that's why they took Malcolm out first. But there's a story behind his death with that as well. We're going to get into that as well. And this right here is a depiction of Malcolm after he was decapitated. And this was in the Muhammad Speaks, his paper, the one Malcolm created. They put this in there, and we're going to read it and go over why was this done. I split because no man wants to be number two, the number two man in nothing. Let me pause. My brothers and sisters and everybody in attendance, Malcolm was the most sought after person in America to speak by everyone except for one person. Only one person was more noted to speak than him, and that's Barry Goldwater. And Barry Goldwater was a senator out of Arizona. So Barry Goldwater was the only one in America that was more sought after to speak. Not Elijah Muhammad, not Dr. King, none of them. It was Brother Malcolm. So let me say this as well, because Brother Jeff is still here. So Brother Jeff knows this as well. I've had people say to me, well, that's your opinion. And this is what Dr. Abraham taught us as historians and history students. Historians don't have opinions. We either telling the truth or we telling a lie. There's nothing in the middle. And everything that you see me saying right here on the screen, I have tons of proof, undebunkable proof. We don't have an opinion. Now, I can answer an opinionated question at the end of a presentation, but during a presentation, I don't put myself in it. I have no say-so about none of this. I'm just giving the narrative as it is. So being the number two man, Malcolm was the number one man. Let's keep it real. As if we want to keep it in proper perspective with the Nation of Islam, this is the order of leadership in their, where you might want to say what they've done for the community. Now, this is opinionated. This is my opinion. Malcolm first, Khalid Muhammad would be second, Elijah Muhammad would be third, and Louis Farrakhan, Louis X, would be fourth. So let's continue on. The officials at the headquarters fear my public image. True. And many have said, including Louis Farrakhan, we were jealous of Brother Malcolm, still are, even in death. The messenger's family are jealous of me. That was absolutely correct. Still is to this day. Even the messenger, blah, 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 blah. And that's true as well. So that's enough. We can move on. So this is Gene Roberts. Now, it must be stated before I get into Gene Roberts. There are people now talking about Raymond Wood. I've been knowing about Raymond Wood. I just didn't know his name, but I'm going to get into that in a minute. But I must stop right here on this image because Gene Roberts was the one who infiltrated Malcolm's organization under BOSSI, Bureau of Special Services and Investigation. He had one intent, to bring down Malcolm's organization. We have always had agents, especially during slavery. That's why Malcolm said you had the house nigger and the field nigger. That's what Brother Malcolm said. That's the one in the house, they're selling out, 99% of them. The one in the field is trying to keep it real and trying to survive. But that being said, the first agent the American government ever had, that would be James Wormley Jones. And what did James Wormley Jones do? He's the one that was instrumental in bringing down the Marcus Garvey movement. And here's Gene Roberts, years later, bringing down Brother Malcolm. And if you remember in that very famous picture, Gene Roberts is the one that's bent over Malcolm, giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And I never thought about this until I heard somebody recently say this. And to be honest, I cannot remember who said it. But as soon as they said it, I said, I never thought about that. But they're right. They said, why would Gene Roberts be giving Malcolm mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when he has bullet holes in his body? You're not trying to save him. You're trying to kill him. And there were others up there that were around Brother Malcolm's body. But we'll get into them as well, because like I said, we're going to cover everyone with this Malcolm story, and especially his murder. And there we go. There we go right there. And that's Gene Roberts, who you see with the afro bending over him. And the one that was holding him, that was Yuri Yaka. I think her name is Yaka. I can't remember her last name, but it's Yuri is her first name. She was an Asian. And so these other men that you see, Guess who those men are? Those are men trying to find those papers. What papers? The one Malcolm had on him where he was going to expose those involved in his death. No problem. We have those names. And this is Thomas Hagen, or Thomas Hager. He was the only one that was captured on that day. Well, in actuality, it was two. And look to your right. You see that paper right there, that paper in that pocket? That's William Bradley. We're going to get into William Bradley in just a moment. All right. Now, I'm going to let everyone know. This video I'm about to play is of William Bradley, and that's him as he got older. He died a few years ago, and he was in New Jersey. He actually was in a commercial with Coy Booker. I call him Coy Booker, but it's Coy Booker. But Coy Booker wasn't privy to the information of who William Bradley was. So William Bradley has been known about because Manning Marble had talked about him before, and there was some others that I heard talk about him. So we've been known about him, just that many people don't allow the historian to tell the unedited version of the story. So we're going to play this video right here real quick.
On Sunday, February 15, 2015, the New York Daily newspaper printed a stunning 8-page write-up on Malcolm X and Malcolm's shotgun killer named William Bradley. Shabazz Productions want to share with you our findings on what happened before, during, and after Malcolm's horrific assassination. We hope these findings will be helpful to our audience. The program will start after this brief commercial.
What is it? Hey, why is fired?
Now, Omar Shabazz is the one who actually put this production together, and he was with the nation, so he used satire, and of course, he had a way with putting things together. He's still living, so this is one of the best pieces of evidence I've seen on William Bradley.
Served in a king-size cup. It beats all the rest.
To pull off the murder of Malcolm X successfully, the Nation of Islam had to first come up with an ingenious plan to get into the ballroom. The Ticketron pay-per-view affairs given by Mosque No. 7 were front-row assassination rehearsals that would start right inside the ballroom that the Nation of Islam would rent out. The plan that they came up with was based on the mythical Trojan horse legend. The Nation of Islam would double up on the myth and put a twisted spin on it that would gain them entry into the Autobahn ballroom, where a lieutenant named Linwood X would distract Malcolm's followers. All that was needed now was a guarantee that everyone would be in their proper places. Lieutenant Linwood X handpicks his team of men that will take care of Malcolm X. William Bradley, Talmadge Hayer, Albert Benjamin Thomas, John Kinley, also known as Wilbur McKinley, Leon Davis, and Clarence Gill. They're ready. They've rehearsed it for months. And now it's time to take out their target. William Bradley will be the lead shooter who will fire the first blast from his sawed-off shotgun. Lieutenant Linwood X could always rely on Bradley when serious enforcement had to be carried out. If Bradley was successful in this most important mission, he'd be set for life. Being deprived night after night from getting a good night's rest and trying to stay alert from non-stop death threats and physical attacks, Malcolm is forced to start dangerously dabbling with over-the-counter sleeping aids.
So don't spend another sleepless night counting sheep. Take Salmonex as directed for 100% safe sleep. No prescription needed. Money back if not satisfied. Get Salmonex at your drugstore now.
But the over-the-counter sleeping aids did not put Malcolm in the deep sleep he really wanted. He would have to step it up and get a doctor to inject a more powerful sedative. What a price to pay fighting for 22 million Afro-Americans' freedom. When Malcolm's house was firebombed, Malcolm stated that he saw someone running in his house and that the pistol that he fired didn't go off.
The fire was on February the 14th.
What if the pistol did fire
7 days
and
before
he hit a
Malcolm's
family
assassination?
member accidentally? Malcolm was so doped up the night of the house bombing, he couldn't see straight. In the book, Malcolm X, The Man and His Times, edited by John Henry Clark, in the chapter, The Last Days of Malcolm X, on page 85, Earl Grant writes this: Brother Malcolm began to describe the evening. He said he had been more tired than usual and had taken a sleeping pill so as to get some rest. Without being disrespectful, I completely lost my temper, and I asked him if he knew what he had done, that if he wanted to sleep that deeply, he could have called me first, and some of the brothers would have come out and stood guard around his house all night. He looked down at me with that big fatherly smile of his, and I just gave up and walked off mumbling to myself. Druggy from Sedatives. Malcolm keeps his speaking engagement at the Ford Auditorium in Detroit on February 14, 1965. The bodyguard of Muhammad Ali, Clarence X. Gill, is appointed to take charge of the war against Malcolm X because of the lack of action to punish Malcolm by members of New York's Mosque No. 7. Clarence Gill is from the Boston Mosque. He is also a captain under Lewis X. Arriving at Mosque No. 25 in Newark, New Jersey on February 21st, 1965 are the two Bostonians, Clarence X. Gill and Lewis X. They are both greeted by Lieutenant Linwood X. The assassination team decide that one of them will carry a special item hidden away in a body wrap with a zippered pocket in case there is a body search by Malcolm's security team. That special item is very important to the success or failure of the mission. Is it a single key to a locker if the weapons are stored in the Autobahn in advance? Could it be airline tickets to a place out of the country? Talmadge Hayer would be chosen to wear the body wrap. Early before noon on February 21, 1965, Linwood X and his team of assassins would leave Mosque No. 25 in Newark, New Jersey, go over the George Washington Bridge, and head straight to the Autobahn Ballroom. While driving, all they could talk about is how they were going to take Malcolm X off the planet. They let the car windows down while smoking some very powerful hashish that will help alter their state of mind and help prepare them for a most horrific act they were about to perform. 2 months before Malcolm's assassination, Lewis X wrote in Muhammad Speaks, "The die is set, and Malcolm shall not escape," especially after such evil, foolish talk about his benefactor, Elijah Muhammad, in trying to rob him of the divine glory which Allah had bestowed upon him. Such a man is worthy of death, and it would have been so were it not for Muhammad's confidence that God would give him the victory over the enemies. Aside from the horrible statement of Malcolm being worthy of death, it's also very chilling that Lewis X's predictive words, "The die is set, and Malcolm shall not escape," clearly suggests that Lewis X had foreknowledge of Malcolm's fate and knew of the rehearsals in the ballroom for Malcolm's murder long before the event took place. He shall not escape. 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 Nearly all of Elijah Muhammad's officials will have key roles in Malcolm's murder. When Malcolm revealed publicly that Elijah Muhammad was faking to be divine and that his money wasn't coming from the sale of newspapers and bean pies, but from the world's richest white man who was in the oil industry,
That's Harrelson Lafayette Hunt.
The Nation of Islam was embarrassed. The mission to physically destroy Malcolm was now hastened. While brutal white human beings were turning powerful water hoses on black people trying to seek freedom, justice, and equality, and while German Shepherd police dogs were biting into the groins of black men and biting into the breast of black women, Elijah Muhammad never unleashed his Fruit of Islam men to fight back against the vicious attacks of hateful whites. All Elijah ever did was reach for the chicken switch whenever fighting was prescribed. The Fruit of Islam, who was supposed to be tough, did nothing in the face of brutal attacks from white people. Many of Elijah Muhammad's Fruit of Islam men were glad to be held back from engaging in war with white people. They were only let loose on their own. And right now, Malcolm X was their #1 target. When talk of Malcolm's irregular sleeping habits started to spread through the grapevine, a secret police agent named Gene Roberts, who gained Malcolm's trust, would report back to his superior named Tony Ulasewicz everything about Malcolm from A to Z. Something like knowing a person's sleeping habits or troubles may appear to be minor to most, but this was the type of thing that they could fully exploit, especially by an enemy. Gene Roberts fed the government enough information about Malcolm when calling in his daily reports. It was used to the maximum. Now the Nation of Islam members were even aware of Malcolm's inability to get a full night's rest. After the firebombing of Malcolm's home, a vote by Malcolm's inner staff members was made about whether or not Malcolm should be allowed to speak at the Autobahn Ballroom's next gathering on February 21st, 1965. Incredibly, only one person objected about Malcolm speaking, but he was overruled by vote. The man who was against Malcolm speaking was a man named Les Edmonds. For maximum damage to the intended target, 00 buck, also called 00 buckshot, is used because of its large size and penetrating ability. The shot is so penetrating, it could easily go through the thick and tough hide of big game animals. After scouting the entire area, the assassin team enter the ballroom and wait for the green go signal. Malcolm arrives at the ballroom so doped up on sedatives, he looks like he aged 10 years overnight. The killers are now in the house. The die is set. Malcolm shall not escape. Gene Roberts, the secret police agent, tells political activist and admirer of Malcolm named Roland Shepherd that he can't sit in the seat that he normally sits in. Shepherd is a regular at the ballroom who's seen and heard Malcolm speak over 20 times. After the murder, Linwood X immediately calls Newark, New Jersey's Mosque No. 25 and Mosque No. 7 and informs that the man called Malcolm X will trouble them no more. We shut that red nigger down, boy. You're gonna have to wait to see it on film. Also captured on film was the attempted escape of Talmadge Hayer, who was nearly pulled apart by Malcolm's followers This amazing footage also reveals the presence of William Bradley, who has a copy of Muhammad Speaks in his coat pocket. Bradley is the man who fired the shotgun at Malcolm. Bradley, knowing that Hare was injured badly, has no choice but to go for the body wrap, Velcro tied to Hare's waist. If Malcolm's followers retrieved the contents of the body wrap, the whole thing could implicate many people, including some of Malcolm's people who were in on the plot. This slowed down footage shows Bradley retrieving the body wrap off of Hare's waist. The body wrap is highlighted with yellow and orange superimposed colors. Once again, in real time, unaltered. Seven of the 12 shotgun pellets from the first blast ripped into his heart, shredded his aorta, as crimson red-colored blood flowed like water from a broken faucet pipe, dripping and flooding into internal cavities, marinating and saturating body and soul. As he clutched his chest, wondering what was the extent of his injuries. Breathing wasn't an option when both lungs were punctured like two newly purchased helium-filled balloons popped by something sharp by a mischievous prankster. Two balloons that seemed like you stood in a line a lifetime to get. Tubes and sacs connected to his bronchial tree erupted, clutching his chest, wondering what was the extent of his injuries. Shotgun pellets went through main organs and lodged in his spine that will soon have to be chiseled out with crude, sharp instruments during his upcoming scheduled autopsy. Still standing, wondering again, to what extent was his injuries? Has heart ventricles contracted, pushing out more blood by the pints, with air gushing from flattening lungs like monsoon winds or a sudden unexpected blown-out tire from a fast-moving vehicle. He couldn't meditate, contemplate, ventilate, oxygenate. And in a last act of defiance, even after being hit, he stood there, determined to prove that black folks didn't have a genetic predisposition to cowardice. And when he could no longer defy the law of physics, he went down in history to rise again, never to be forgotten. Didn't they know you can't keep a good man down? Now we want more answers. We know for certain the leadership of the Nation of Islam planned Malcolm's murder. And we know for certain the names of many participants. What about the New York City Police Department? Where did they suddenly appear from after the shooting? Were they present to protect Malcolm or to protect the killers? Why was William Bradley so casual and not quick to run to the getaway car? Why don't we have photographs of all of Malcolm's named assassins? Why was Malcolm allowed to speak while being in such a worn-out, overworked state that he was in? Why didn't Malcolm's followers notice that the Nation of Islam were holding affairs right inside the Autobahn ballroom? Who had Malcolm's back? What was in that body wrap? Was it airline tickets? Keys? Bradley and Hayer, how about granting us an interview? We want to ask you both some real tough questions. On Sunday, February 15, 2015, the New York Daily News.
So that's the presentation on William Bradley. Now, William Bradley, as you saw, he changed his name to Mustafa Muhammad Shabazz, and he would move to New Jersey where he would live out his life. And he lived quietly, and he died a couple of years ago. But Raymond Wood is the name that surfaced because we knew there was one person that was missing, and I don't want to give that away yet, why that name was missing. Here it is right here. So following Malcolm's death on that day, as you can see, this is the New York Herald Tribune. If you notice on the right-hand side, the first edition of that paper came out. Notice it says, police rescue 2 suspects. Later that day, it was 1 at the bottom. See, it says police rescue 1 suspect. Well, the 2 was Raymond Wood, and the other one would be Thomas Hayer or Thomas Hagen. Hagen, they kept, but the reason why Raymond Wood was allowed to be released because he was a New York police officer. So his exact details as to what exactly he was doing on that particular day, I don't know. But I will tell you this, I happened to get my hands on a book that was written about Raymond Wood following his announcement as being the second perpetrator that was arrested at Malcolm's execution. And so once I finished reading that book and gathering the information that is necessary, I will come back to let y'all know exactly what I found in my research. Dick Gregory. Now here's the strange thing about Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory was directly and indirectly involved in Dr. King's death and Malcolm's death. Please understand what I'm saying. Am I saying that Dick Gregory was complicit in killing either one of them? No, I'm not saying that. Will I say that he had any knowledge about both of them being killed? I'm definitely saying that. And I'm going to show you 100% proof of Dick Gregory, especially when it came to Malcolm's death. So we're going to get into that momentarily. We're going to get into that right now. And as you can see, the man to the right, that's Al Sharpton. That's when he was a little bit bigger than what he is. I want you to listen closely to Dick Gregory implicating himself in the knowledge of Malcolm's murder. So I'm going to let him speak for himself.
So when I think about my brother Malcolm, I think about this little thing that just happened with his daughter, and I'll be honest with you. I got 10 children, 7 girls, 3 boys. If I thought I had a child that thought somebody killed me and wanted to avenge it and waited 30 years, I sure enough would have an attitude. I mean, you can give that chum time to die from natural causes. I mean, girl, do you love me or not? But listen what they told us. They told us that Malcolm X's daughter, see, I don't deal in friendship. Did she do it or not? I deal in logics. Here's a woman here in New York City. She decides she's going to kill Farrakhan. She leaves New York where all the murderers are. that'll kill somebody for you just to practice, because they know they're going to kill somebody on July the 4th. They just want to practice. She leaves New York, all the murderers, and goes to Minnesota where they ain't even had a drive-by shooting. Think about it. Go ahead. To hire a white boy to kill one of the most guarded brothers. A white boy. We don't even have to deal with that. I knew Malcolm. I loved Malcolm. Malcolm called me the Sunday that he died. I was working Basin Street East. He said, "Brother Greg, you coming by today?" And I said, "Malcolm, I love you." And I said, "I love you so much, I don't even want to take a chance to be there." He said, "What do you mean, Brother Greg?" I said, "Well, I close tonight, Sunday night at Basin Street East." And I said, "But I had my wife book me a flight into Chicago at 8 o'clock this morning, and I'm going to Chicago, and I had way beneath my salary booked me into a college about 10 miles from the airport. And I'm going to go there and speak this afternoon, and I'm going to stay there until they tell me you dead. Because I'm not going to let this government get two of us for the price of one. And I'm going to call Adam Clayton Powell when I finish talking to you and beg him not to come there. Because today, the United States government is going to get you. Okay. And I'm not going to be there. I love you. I don't even want to take a chance of my heart changing. So I went to Chicago. And when they came and they told me Malcolm's been killed today, I got back on the plane and came back here. Malcolm was killed because of another brother named DePinto. A lot of people thought he was African, but he was East Indian. He was born in Nairobi. He's the one that changed Malcolm's head from black nationalist to Pan-Africanism and made that connection from here to there. And the government said, we can't let this happen. He's the one that persuaded Malcolm when he went to Africa and stayed 7 weeks and met with all the real leaders. And then he's the one that discussed with Malcolm of bringing racism to the doorsteps of the UN. And as Malcolm was being shot dead in New York City, DePinto was being gunned down in Nairobi. All right. Same time. All right? Same time. So don't tell me about no black Muslims. That's a fact. That's a fact. The same time. Same time. Malcolm was being gunned down. Now, let me finish this by saying this. And you folks out there on radio, when we cut off, that's why you should be here. Let that go right there. Yeah, y'all come on down. Yeah. We'll be here. We're not, you know, if you get here late, we'll be here next week. Just wait on us. You ain't got nothing to do. Nothing to do. Now, let me show you how this white racist system treats black folks. The black folks that they got to kill Malcolm, Malcolm was standing on a stage like I am. They threw a smoke bomb in the back. When everybody got to watch the commotion, the brothers ran up with double-barrel shotguns and shot him. But under the Freedom of Information Act, we were able to get the autopsy of Malcolm, and all the bullets in Malcolm is going down. Now, I can't stand on this stage and y'all down there pointing up, which means the government have such a low view of those black folks that would do it. They didn't even give them real bullets. They gave them blanks. Malcolm was shot from the ceiling top. And also under the Freedom of Information, the CIA have been forced to admit that they rented the Audubon Ballroom a week before. And that's when they went in there and tore them walls out and put them guns in the wall and shot him from a downward projection. That's what this game is about. But Malcolm lived a good life.
Yes, he did.
The movie did not portray that.
Of course not.
The movie was an insult. I mean, here my man get killed, ain't got no insurance, no money. Betty pregnant with twins, got 4 kids, and then have 2 more, and then go ahead and raise them and go on and get her a doctor's degree. And in that old heathen movie, they ain't got room in that to tell me about what Betty did. But can show Malcolm snorting coke and having sex with a white woman in a car. This is a black person that did that. And then show Malcolm putting his head in a toilet. Now that's in the book, page 122. Malcolm has never put his head in a toilet. So if that shows up in the book, the conspiracy goes all the way back to Alex, who didn't write Malcolm, nor did he write Roots. A white boy, the senior editor of Playboy magazine, Murray Fisher, wrote both them books. And as we stand here now, them 2 books makes about $7 to $8 million royalty right now every year. Then how come when Alex died, they had to auction off his stuff to pay off his bills? How come they didn't attach his royalties? Because he don't get no royalties. That's the game. All right? The whole book's a lie.
Now, that concludes it. This is the end of part 1, but I'm not going to leave you hanging on what exactly Dick Gregory said. I couldn't hear it. And the reason why I can't hear it because my sister is controlling the audio, and she's doing a great job, by the way. Y'all don't know, it's always someone that helps you with what you're doing. I don't need to hear this because I've heard it I don't know how many times. So let's break down a few things because there's 3 major issues that we have to address with Dick Gregory in this speech. Number 1, how did Dick Gregory know that? When I first saw this video, I said, how did Dick Gregory know you're going to die today? The American government is going to get you, is what he said. But how did you know that, Dick Gregory? Well, here's where I have an opinion. And I told you we don't have opinions. But this is an opinion that holds water. The reason he was upset with Malcolm being dead is probably, and the reason why he knew prior, because he had a connection with the Nation of Islam. What do I mean by that? Let me explain the story between Dick Gregory and Malcolm. Look it up. Malcolm and Dick Gregory were friends. Notice I said past tense. They were friends. But Brother Malcolm gave a speech on television, and you can look this video up. I actually have it. I posted it, I think, last week. If you go on my Facebook page, it's on my Facebook page, Professor Bobby. Look for the one with Malcolm speaking. And this is where he's speaking about Dick Gregory on what I'm about to tell you. He was with a young brother. I can't recall his name. This was, of course, back in the 60s. And near the end of the presentation, this is what Brother Malcolm said, paraphrasing. I'm not saying the words exact, I'm paraphrasing. He smiled and he said to the commentator, he said, how many leaders do you have that are actors and comedians and clowns? He said, Lena Horne and Dick Gregory, they're clowns and actresses. They're not leaders. And he smiled the whole time, but that was how Malcolm did what he did. He was smiling, but he was very serious. Dick Gregory was upset about that. How do we know he was upset about that? Because right after that, pay attention to Dick Gregory, he was around the Nation of Islam quite a bit. Quite a bit. In videos and still photographs. That's number 1. Number 2. Dick Gregory said that Malcolm was shot from the ceiling. Using the Freedom of Information Act, we got proof they were shot from the ceiling. Dick Gregory knew he was lying when he said that. Malcolm was not shot from the ceiling. Malcolm was shot from the floor. All that was there said the same thing. And one, Herman Ferguson, who was a part of Malcolm's organization, who was sitting, I think, on the 2nd row, Herman Ferguson said he thought the same thing that Dick Gregory said, but he noticed that there was no flashing light. There was no smoke. Ex-military people, and I'm ex-military, you know there's going to be a flash and there's going to be some type of smoke from what? From the bullet itself. Well, from, because there's gunpowder in it. So he was not shot from the ceiling. So Dick Gregory was telling a lie, and he knew he was telling a lie. There's no way he can't say he wasn't telling a lie. We have to also connect Dick Gregory, Lewis X. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying the two of them conspired to do anything against Malcolm. But what I am saying, and I have proof of, and I'm going to give you just a couple of books that you might want to go and buy. Number one, The Judas Factor by Carl Evans. Evanzz, Carl Evans. Number two, Zach Condo's book, which I can't think of the title of his book, but look up Zach Condo, Zakkondo, Zach Condo's book. Then you can look for the brother, I cannot think of his name right now. He has a Muslim name. He's a Muslim. And he was the one who did the 6-part documentary on Netflix. And it's very well researched. And he talks about, of course, Raymond Wood. But again, like I said, the historians have always known there were two people. We just didn't know who it was. So I give him credit on that. So those are three major sources on who killed Brother Malcolm. So this is the end of part one. In 2 weeks from today, I will return with part two, and that's going to cover Dr. King. So make sure you come back. That's about 30 slides as well.